afflicted very much. Quicken me, O Lord, according to thy word. Accept, I beseech thee, the freewill offerings of my mouth, O Lord, and teach me thy judgments. My soul is continually in my hand, yet I do not forget thy law. The wicked have laid a snare for me, yet I heard not from thy precepts. Thy testimonies have I taken as an heritage forever. For they are the rejoicing of my heart. I have inclined my heart to perform thy statutes always, even to the end.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies, continuing in Genesis chapter 37. We're going to begin reading at verse 1 just so we keep it in context. That'll be good here. Then we remember the story. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, her father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood around about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said unto him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and his brethren, and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come and bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? And his brethren envied him. But his father observed the saying. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said unto him, Here am I. And he said unto him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him. And behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, They are departed hence. For I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren, and found them in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him again to his father. Deliver him to his father again. Sorry, I read that one. And and it came to pass when Joseph was come to his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery, balm, and myrrh. going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph unto Egypt, or into Egypt. And Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. And he returned unto his brethren and said, The child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat, and killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, This have we found. Now know whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it, and said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes, and put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, and captain of the guard. So, going back, and the last time I focused on, not so much their situation, but as how to avoid a situation of jealousy and envy. Because though this is, we could call it fate, this is destiny. Joseph has the dream. The dream itself sort of paves the way for destiny. That's why here's the thing. It's not as though God doesn't intercede in the affairs of men to change what would have been, but naturally to be what he intends. Because it's not like just that there's hands off. The world runs pretty much by itself, but the Lord intervenes in the affairs of men. If he didn't, where would our faith come from? Where did Abraham's faith come from? You know where it came from? God spoke to him. That would inspire a bit of faith in a lot of people. Not in all. A lot of people say God speaks to them, and boy, you wonder if they're listening very good. Because I've listened to God speak, through his word, not through, I haven't had a lot of... Well, I use that understanding to inform many things. So, on many things, the Spirit of God speaks to us, or should. Not necessarily in an audible voice, but in fact that when our consciences have absorbed the right idea and of right and wrong, and also like at what level of analysis it begins. To understand that I'm responsible, yes, for my thoughts. Because out of the heart proceeds all the evil and the murder and the fornication. And also, from God's thoughts, he brought forth words that made the worlds. I believe in freedom of speech, but there is power in words. They're not wrong to say words are violence. Is not the sword of the living God the word of his mouth? Is it not the power that created the word? So words are powerful. The word of God is particularly powerful. It is sharp and powerful as any two-edged sword, dividing asunder even the soul and the spirit. So we listen so that we may learn, because there's certain aspects. Who wants to have their children conspiring, so though that is destiny and the Lord was in it, that doesn't mean that we can't take from that example and because yes, I've had a very, my path hasn't been just this smooth, wonderful thing, but it's like, as a person who has learned of God, I feel an obligation to put into practice the things I've learned. Otherwise, why am I still living? If I just know everything and that's all I need, well, then let me die and then we'll enter into God's kingdom. But I'm still alive, so I have to put into practice the things that I say I believe in. And the level of analysis is at the very heart of man. Our hearts have to be right. That's where envy comes from. I'm not saying Jacob didn't make them envious. They were envious. He could have done things to forestall that. And certainly, that's what I think as a parent might do. I don't want to cast stumbling blocks before my children. I give them any occasion to stumble. And, favoring one over the other will give them occasion to stumble if they're not, morally ready for something like that, to accept, being second rated. It is, a hard blow, especially coming from your parents or something. It's not, it's one thing to have the outside world think of you as second rate, but it's at work or whatever. But, we have this idea that man's home is his castle, right? And also for children, it is a sanctuary, or it ought to be. It should be their home. They should feel comfortable there. They should feel safe. And we create that environment. So, though I'm 100%, I've done a lot of things that I regret that I know the Lord made work for good. But that doesn't mean the same good couldn't have been worked by me working what is good also. And it's like, just because the Lord uses my evil to bring about good doesn't mean I don't still have responsibility for having done those things, or that I shouldn't take responsibility if God has now forgiven me. I should take responsibility for the things that I create in this world, the situations I bring to bear. And I've got to answer for them. It can be, it's, if we do not properly understand how the Lord has paid the price for us, and that truly we are accepted in the beloved, and this is, without repentance on the part of God, He's not going to change His mind. We can easily fall into the kind of negative thinking that is not healthy. It's good to examine ourselves, but Jacob creating this situation, he doesn't know, he doesn't even suspect, as far as we know, which is good, because that's, he'd be angry. He what is he going to do? Kill the rest of his sons, for doing this evil thing? It's very sordid. It's not they were gonna kill him. That was like their thought. Let's conspire to kill. Let's agree together. That's a big conspiracy, though. 11 brothers, or 10. Benjamin wouldn't be part of this. Benjamin's still a little guy. Well, he's younger anyways, right? And so here comes this dreamer, It's good to have dreams, but, as anyone knows, your dreams are very interesting to you. When you tell other people your dreams, it's always it's hard for them to follow, because if you weren't there, especially if it's some odd experience, unless you have a real clear dream. I've told a couple of clear dreams that were real short, so it's worth telling. Long involved dreams can be, whatever. But when people already don't like you, telling them about your dream is a bad move socially. Because it comes off as a bit self-absorbed. And, since Jacob favors Joseph so heavily. And like Joseph, I presume he is a man of the tents. His coat of many colors signifying, well, I don't know exactly everything. I know people have done, I don't know what to say about it, except that it signifies his favor over him and his important position. He's wearing like this striking coat, right? So his father favors him in many things. And we learn from from I have hindsight, because of course I've read this before, that we know, if we are familiar with the story of Genesis, we should be. Joseph, when he goes into Egypt, and you should at least watch the DreamWorks movie. I mean, that was a decent telling, actually. Joseph, King of Dreams. But anyways, not completely faithful to the scriptures, of course, but it's a good, just to get the story, because the story is pretty simple and straightforward. He goes down to Egypt, and he does so well managing the house of Potiphar, who he is sold to. And why is that? Why is he? Because he is an intelligent and learned individual. Okay, he's been favored. He's probably been taught more than the others too, because maybe dad has more time now. Now they're out working in the field. He's taking time with the younger one to raise him more, kind of the way you might, maybe his mother or whatever with him. I don't know. That would be kind of weird. I don't know what the literacy level of women was back then, but I'm guessing it was vanishingly small. It's not their fault. It just wasn't done. Teach a woman to read. Why? There's no. It just didn't come up. I mean, as far as that, in those societies. Okay, and this dreamer cometh. He's a dreamer. They want to. Okay. Their cover story they've already worked out. Some evil beast hath devoured him. We'll see what becomes of his dreams. See, when you have these dreams, when you seem self-absorbed, to tell people dreams, it's going to make them like you even less, because now you're making them listen to your internal life. And, they have a predisposition. They can't, as it said before, they can't say anything nice to him. They just can't speak peaceably with him. They just, everything they, it's like, I've seen that with kids where they get such animosity for each other. Not really in my home, but I've seen the beginnings of it, and I was trying to nip that in the bud before it gets to be an issue. Because, little ones can get on the nerves of older ones, right? And they can constantly start snapping at them. It doesn't help if the adults are like that. Children can be very annoying. And if when they... are, they have to, one, learn to be respectful and not rude like that. But that's the thing to say, hey, we need to be, you can't be jumping around and da-da-da-da. It's like, if you keep doing that, there's going to be, you take the calm route. You just tell them straight up, we don't do this. When you lose control, you're like, shut up. It's like, I've done that and it doesn't help. And what it does is, the children are pretty much the same. When people irritate them, they become the same kind of snappy, bite you type of people. And so it's better to just calmly, just when you see them acting badly, tell them no, set consequences that are, my kids always believe me when I tell them there'll be a spanking, because that's all I want little ones to be quiet. They early on, they learn it. I'm like, and if you don't, I'm going to come out, if I have to come out there to tell you to be quiet again, I'm going to spank you. And you're not going to like it. And I never found that they... because as long as you faithfully do that, I mean, you're going to follow up on it if they don't listen. You'll find that they're, even good little monkeys sometimes forget, right? Curious George and all. I agree. I always thought that that you got to take it into account. Little kids, especially little kids, can't expect them to be quiet all day. They need to run around and scream a bit. It's important. It's part of being a little kid. Anyways, but I'm just talking about fostering an environment where you don't, when you can't communicate without hatred coming out, things have gone pretty badly. And either because it's such a big family, and I understand this, it's such a big family with different moms and stuff. It's just, it'd be very complicated. That's why, I knew someone who was going to take on a second wife, and they thought this was some Christian biblical thing they could do. I'm like, I just thought, why would you do that? It's only going to cause problems. Absolutely bad idea. Just because this something was, all things that are permissible are not necessarily profitable. Well, Jacob had multiple wives. He wasn't out. He didn't look for multiple wives. So Abraham, again, it was the wife that sort of said, "Here, take my concubine, or take my servant Hagar as a concubine, etc., whatever." And then after Sarah died, he married Keturah. He wasn't and Isaac never married anyone. He was never with anyone except Rebekah. And Jacob, all he wanted was Rachel, but he was sort of conned or tricked, whatever, into marrying Leah first, by Laban. And so it wasn't something he was trying to create. Don't try. Sometimes we fall into life situations that are complicated. Sometimes there's hey, my ex-girlfriend's got a couple babies, and I don't have that situation, but I get it. It could have happened to me. Fortunately, I wised up real early. At 19, I started realizing things about life and the Lord, and so I started getting away. So I didn't end up getting anybody pregnant and having a kid with someone I shouldn't marry or try to have children with. But it creates complicated situations that are difficult to deal with. It gets more difficult. I don't know how to raise somebody else's kids. I never claimed to be some expert on kids. I raised my own kids. They had nice temperaments, and I instilled in them discipline, and it wasn't that hard. It didn't seem hard, but it worked. And I believe everything is a combination of nature and nurture. That's why God put us in this world. Otherwise, why not just create us finished? Why not just create us as we are on the day of resurrection? On that perfect state. Why not just make us perfect? Because people ask, why not? Because having it nature and nurture is better in God's eyes. That's why I assume that part. The truest thing I could say is he deemed it that it should be this way. I can say that for sure. That this is the way he wanted it. It's not necessarily because I always say reality isn't necessarily the best, most perfect reality. The thought that it has to be that is a prejudice we read into it. It's not that the ways have to be perfect. It's that they're the ways that God has chosen. This is the world as he has decided to allow it to unfold and has directed it to unfold. But in the midst of it, but as it unfolds naturally, he acts supernaturally. When I received the Holy Spirit, that was not a natural event. When Jesus rose from the dead, that was not natural. When you could say it was not according to the processes of the natural course of the world as we usually experience it. That's all I mean by that. It's we don't really know what the nature of anything really is. So calling things nature and stuff, that's a prejudice of human language. Reality and all that stuff. That's a prejudice of human language. We call it reality. It could be, and then scientists are oh, maybe it's a simulation. Even, well, if it is, maybe it is. That would actually make more sense if you wanted to think that the Earth was only 6,000 years old. It's just simulated anyway, so everything there is just there to look like, but no, they don't believe that. They simultaneously want the Bible to be literally true and the rocks to be literally true. It's kind of a tough order. You can't have both. One of them has to be a metaphor maybe, or what? Or, like I talk about sometimes, some things creep into the text. Sometimes it's numbers and stuff, I don't know. I'm just skeptical of that part. That's all. There's reason to be. I believe in God, but it's I know his word has been passed from human beings, and they've been entrusted with it, and I know it hasn't been He hasn't like made it impossible to do it. It's like things have been done. Now, like I said, most of it's kind of innocent. Like I said, nobody's like turning things around and saying, okay, drink blood and worship devils. That doesn't, I mean, it's like, oh, that's what it used to say. That's the thing. If you want to control people, you don't tell them don't fornicate. You say you can fornicate in this religion. Ooh. Yes. And then you put limits on other weird things. So, when Joseph was come unto his brethren. Anyway, oh yeah. So, Reuben heard it. And remember, he's the oldest. Also, it's already been told he went up to his father's bed and lay with his concubine. It was not his own mother, but the mother of one of his half-brothers. And Jacob heard it. He didn't say anything about it yet. It gets brought up at the end of, it's why as a firstborn he is rejected. He's never considered, the princely line is Judah. The priestly line is Levi. The leading tribe politically was Joseph or Ephraim. Ephraim and Manasseh together being the two tribes that are really just one tribe, the tribe of Joseph. And, though in the book of Revelation they just state it's Joseph and Manasseh because they left the name of Ephraim out. And some people have suppositions as to why that is, like perhaps because Ephraim was so closely associated with the abominations and idolatry that went on. But there was abominations and idolatry in Judah. It's like saying Judah isn't included because Judah was included. It's like excluding them because their name is associated with the rejection of Christ or something like that. It's not, if there is something to be upset, for God. So I don't know that that's I'm not sure about that. That's why I don't say that very often. Oh, they were excluded for idolatry. All the tribes participated in idolatry. And I suppose you could say, yes, it was more the golden calves were located in Dan and in Ephraim, I believe. Anyways, so they Reuben still he is the oldest, and though he falls somewhat from the potential, as Joseph is the oldest of the beloved wife, and Reuben is the oldest of the hated wife. Let's say it's just for the sake of argument, just because the loved less. He did not intend to marry Leah. Ladies, would you like to find yourself married to a guy you didn't want to marry? You thought you were marrying some other guy, so I hope we could all sympathize with Jacob's plight. And so it's not so much the hate, it's like, well, I don't love you. It's like, that can feel a lot like hate, especially when you yourself, aren't really asked about it, So Reuben, he's trying to intercede and make sure he doesn't get killed. And his plan is to deliver him back to his father again. He's going to just kind of figure out some way to get Joseph out of this and hopefully maybe cover, like, haha, as a joke. He doesn't really have this fully formed idea. He's just like, no, don't kill him. He's saying, if we can just not kill him right away, maybe put him in a pit, just trying to delay that. And plus, he's our brother. We shouldn't kill him. And they did definitely buy into this idea of, well, he's our kin, because then they take him and put him in the pit. And I don't know if Reuben has to go see to something, but so he's in the pit. Of course, they stripped him out of his coat and take the coat and they throw him in the pit. It's an empty pit with no water. It'd be very frightening for a young man, in that situation. They sat down to eat. And I see a company of Ishmaelites. I've seen this passage brought up like, oh, look at it. It's a contradiction in the Bible. It says Ishmaelites, and then it says Midianite merchantmen. And it's not really... Those two people are very closely associated with her. They're both Abrahamic tribes. outside of Isaac, right? But the Midianites, and it's interesting that it's Midianites already. I mean, this is just the grandchildren of Abraham. Time always seems so compressed. But anyways, it seems, it's hard sometimes for me to like not comment on that fact because it just seems like, okay, that's awfully compressed time. There are Ishmaelites now and Midianites. Ishmael, I mean, it would be grandchildren, but it would be grandchildren. Lavan, Ishmael had a number of sons. So, I mean, it's like, it could be 30, 40 Ishmaelites in the world. And Midianites, maybe 6. I mean, if there were a lot of kids and grandkids, but that's about the level we could expect. I mean, and there could be kids beyond that if they'd had children more prodigiously. I mean, Abraham only had Isaac as the heir. And Isaac had Jacob and Esau, so that's a slow takeoff. You look at Ishmael and Midian. But anyways, the idea of the contradiction I find a lot less concerning. Like I said, to me, it's more the fact that there are Ishmaelites already. And it's like, there couldn't be more than great-grandchildren. I guess it could be more. That's what I'm saying. Okay, we're going great-great-grandchildren. All right, there's hundreds of them. But not much more than that, So it's a small number. But they would probably be familiar with them, I guess, as being kin to a degree. So, anyways, a company of Ishmaelites. Now, the way you look at this is like, okay, well, perhaps it's a question of, are they Ishmaelites ethnically, and then Midianite in their merchantmen, culture, so to speak. Meaning, maybe there's these Midianite caravans, bringing trading, going down to Egypt, right? And it's this thing the Midianites are into. They do this, and so it's like it's the association of an ethnicity with a trade. Oh, it's Midianite traders, but actually, they're Ishmaelites. Ethnically, running this particular caravan. That's one way to look at it. That's what I forgot where I received that, but like the understanding of it, it's like, okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Because as far as like were there Midianites or Ishmaelites, in some way both. I mean, you can be both. You can be an Italian and an American. You can say, well, these American businessmen came, and they were all Italians. I mean, that's no big deal. I mean, that's not a straight, so again, Midianite merchantmen, all Ishmaelites, That's why it probably tells you they're Ishmaelites. It's like there was, it would normally be expected to be Midianites, wouldn't it? But no, it was Ishmaelites or whatever. I don't know. I don't think it's that important whether it was, because it uses them both here, the Ishmaelites, interchangeably. And my thought is the reason it's used interchangeably is because it was thought to be interchangeable. It's no big deal. We are the ones who are making it. When we look at them, we're like, oh, which is it? It's like, well, they didn't differentiate because there's no difference as far as they're concerned. I mean, it's like there's half dozen of one and 6 of the other. Okay, and they drew and lifted Joseph out of the pit. Just checking our time. Yeah, he's our brother in our flesh. Well, first they start off this. What profit is there if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? That's a pretty dark thought. It's like, well, we get rid of him, but what profit is there? Let's sell him. And this, it reminds me a lot, of course, the crucifixion. Christ was sold for 40 pieces of silver. And his blood, and let not our hand be upon him. They used the Romans to crucify him and betray him. And it's interesting because, the way, they say history repeats itself, but then they say, well, maybe not, but it rhymes. That's definitely true. Let our hand, he is our brother in the flesh, and his brethren were content. They thought, that's a good idea. We'll sell him down to Egypt. We won't kill him, but we'll sell him into slavery. which is pretty terrible also, because you don't know what kind of slave he's going to be made into. If he's just sold off like that, like some people were made slaves because they owed someone money, and in a certain, in being within your nation, becoming a servant to another man to pay off a debt, there was often a lot of legal protection around that. And when we get to the law, we'll talk about that, because I find it very interesting, right? There is this legal protection. But for war slaves, depending on what country, it's like in Israel, actually, they were, even then, the way you were to regard slaves and treat them was humanely. Not like this chattel slavery we had in the United States. Now, all over the world, though, it was often just like chattel slavery in the United States. It was extremely brutal. The Romans were very brutal to their slaves. Again, also depending on, what kind of slave you were. If you were a war captive slave, they'll work you to, if you're a criminal and been enslaved, you work you to death. But if you were a Roman citizen who fell in hard times and had to be sold to another, you'd still, I don't know if you can even be sold as a slave as a Roman citizen. But if you were an artisan, and a lot of times slaves were artisans and had skills and stuff. If you had skills, then you'd be, sold on a much different kind of market. A skilled worker who is indebted in a slave will find himself working at his skill, especially if it's needed, and that way serving out their debt, depending on the society, depending on their status in the society. Someone who is considered part of a nation, like when you, as far as like, people often say like, oh, it says a man can sell off his daughter and his sons and all that. Yeah, they were supposed to sell them to other Jews within the state to protect, so that they could be protected, and that, their labor would pay off the debt, and they wouldn't necessarily be enslaved forever either. But yeah, it's terrible. But Joseph here, he's being sold to another country. So this is short of murder, is what they've come up with. Reuben's hoping to do something more like, let's scare him. Because as the oldest, and he's got to be a bit far removed from all this, I would hope. And he does. He has a better view of it, even though he himself, he's disappointed his father already, to say the least. And so, in some ways, he's probably anxious to make amends in many ways for what he'd done. And so, he wants to show himself a good son, as sons, usually do, if they have half a chance. If they think their father's someone worth pleasing. It's not often. Sometimes that's not the case. So let's sell him the Ishmaelites. He's our brother in our flesh. His brethren were content. And there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. 2/3 as much as Christ. There's 30 pieces. There's 20. There's inflation. I'm just kidding. Okay. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben goes back to the pit, and Joseph is not in the pit. He rent his clothes. Jacob rent his clothes, and Reuben. I always liked the rent his clothes line when I was growing up, and I found that in the Bible. I always just thought that was kind of like, they were, it's like, it's a cultural thing. We don't really do that anymore. But we sometimes do, right? I've torn a couple shirts off. It's fun, especially when they're not well made. If you have a well made shirt, it gets to be a bit of a struggle. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. Okay, yeah. So, and he rent his clothes. He returned to his brother. It's a sign. But you can imagine when someone tears their clothes, it's like it's a sign of anguish, and of like not knowing what to do. It's like your clothes are like an essential thing. To tear at them is to tear at. It's like your very life is wounded, and that's kind of like what he says. You see, he's like, the child is not, and where am I gonna go? I can't go home to dad. Are you kidding me? I mean, that's how he feels. Again, he does go, but this is what he said, because this is indicating his feelings. It's like, I can't go home without Joseph. He's not here, and where am I going to go? I like his thoughts. Like, where's the child? And he's lost, and so am I. So they killed the kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father. It's interesting, they sent it and they brought it. Interesting thought. I mean, it's just an interesting way of putting those. Because sent sounds like as a messenger, but then when they say brought it makes me think that they were personally bringing it. I mean, how could they do anything? So I sort of think of it as they sent themselves. Maybe they sent word to their father and then they brought that, they sent the coat of many colors, and it says they sent the coat and they brought it. They sent themselves with the coat, whatever, it's okay. This we have found. Like I said, a lot of this stuff, people might look at that and be like, oh, that's some sort of like, they can't figure out what it's just an expression that is used in another language. Because to say they sent the colors and then they brought it, it's a linguistic thing that we maybe don't quite get. But, that's sometimes what you have in the scriptures. You have an ancient language that, expresses things differently, and they translate it. And sometimes it doesn't come out exactly intelligible, or as intelligible to us as maybe it would be to them, or the entire nature of what's being said is not immediately obvious. So, this we have found. Know whether it be thy son's coat or no. Is it? Here, no. This reminds me of when I was a kid. My dad told me about what I'm like. What when he talked to me about crossing railroad tracks, and how police will come to when people don't they could come to your door in the middle of the night, and there's almost nothing to identify you with, just a couple of fragments of bloody clothing. It reminds me of that, like something bad has happened. So he knew the coat. This is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Oh wow, their story worked. They must have felt so great. Yeah, I don't know. I was like the story of Joseph, but I was always kind of aware that I was in a similar position, because I was my dad's second wife's first son. And he had another family before that. And when I was growing up, especially for my older brother, I felt his, I don't want to say resentment, because he never seemed resentful, but I felt the hurt he felt from perceiving that, my parents were more interested in me and loving towards me than, my dad and his ex-wife had been when he was a child, or, and the divorce happening when it did in the midst of his childhood, as a 9-year-old. I mean, that's got to be scarring. But I remember reading the story of Joseph, and it helped me understand that, I should be respectful and not mouth off, too much to my older siblings, and especially not to, to be. Certainly don't try to what would I call it, to to build up, or what is it, to build up this idea that I'm the special child, I'm the golden child, even though I might be being treated that way. I learned to shun that idea. It actually, so much so, it actually, that whole part, don't make golden children, because it's, Joseph, is kind of good for him that he got thrown into prison, and because it turns him into a different, that experience makes him a better man. It just does. Not that he didn't already have it in him. You know what I mean? He had it in him. But going through what he went through made him into who he became. You know, that's why I say there are some things that are part of destiny that are not enjoyable. They hurt. Or they're difficult. But they are extremely valuable. I mean, we got to make them. If I make a mistake, I want to make the most of that mistake. That's the idea, is to make the most of our errors, to make the most of our mistakes. You know, and to learn. You know, having the scriptures, having this, we can learn. We can see the evil that was worked, though the evil that was worked, God worked it for good. He turned their evil into something good for all. To save not only them, but all Egypt. But, we should cultivate within our families love, understanding, and trust. When there are broken families, you got to be aware of the potential for envy, especially when there's age differences, because a lot of times older kids don't get it, that like little babies always get more attention. Now it can go beyond that, right? And because I'm not denying that there isn't favoritism or that I wasn't the beneficiary of it. I got favored. But the point is, every baby is favored in some way. It's easy to get to look and say, wow, they sure pay more attention to the baby than they do to maybe the 9-year-old. Granted, because babies just need more attention. But that is not to say that the 9-year-old understands that or can deal with the feelings they're having of especially if they weren't nurtured perhaps as much as they should have been to begin with, because the first relationship was not good. It was bad. It fell apart. All kinds of problems. Maybe they were too young to have kids and they didn't do as good a job. I know a lot of people that they feel like their early kids, they didn't quite work out, like that they as parents didn't do so very well for their kids. They could have done better for them. They could have raised them better, and they wish they would have. And then they maybe on their later kids, they feel they've done better. I've often said that is when I used to joke, well, if I have a lot of kids, I have a better chance that some of them will turn out right. And not just, that's not a slam on them. It's a slam on my own ability as a young person to be a parent. What do I really know? It's like I did have good instincts, and I was reading a lot at that time. I didn't read a lot. I read a couple books about being a father, but I remember as I read them, I felt, as always, I felt like, well, I agree with this, I don't agree with that, Anyways, but he rends his clothes. So he mourns for him many days. Jacob is very broken up. They rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. I will go down to the grave under my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. He accepted the death of his favorite son. Maybe even blamed himself, because of whatever. He doesn't think his other sons have anything to do with it. He can't imagine such a thing. It's that level of treachery. They almost killed their brother. That's pretty dark. It's very dark. And, for their sake, it's good they hadn't. Obviously, the Lord would not allow it and work things that so that, the nation of Israel would rise with 12 tribes. So the Midianites sold him unto Egypt to Potiphar. He is the officer of Pharaoh, a captain of the guard. Or an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. I don't know if there's more than one of those. But anyways, we're going to pick up at chapter 38 next time. People are doing some clog dancing around there. That's not why I'm stopping. But I've got to go somewhere, and so we're going to just end this study here. We'll pick it up at chapter 38 next time. I don't really have much more to say. At least nothing that occurs to my mind right now. I had thought about other things when I was reading. There was something when we read about Jacob, or was that later? I don't know, whatever. It's something about being stereotypical again. I probably shouldn't point that out because it probably makes me look bad, but I just think it's funny. Anyways, so thanks for joining me. Look forward to being back again tomorrow. Until then.
I am afflicted very much. Quicken me, O Lord, according to thy word. Accept, I beseech thee, the freewill offerings of my mouth, O Lord, and teach me thy judgments. My soul is continually in my hand, yet I do not forget thy law. The wicked have laid a snare for me, yet I heard not from thy precepts. Thy testimonies have I taken as an heritage forever. For they are the rejoicing of my heart. I have inclined my heart to perform thy statutes always even.